Thank you to my patients and to the organization for inviting me to be here. Before I get started, I just want to do a shout out and a round of applause for the organizing committee here. Mindy and this community have put together a fabulous event with very little resources. So thank you to those of you who have donated, and thank you to the committee who made this happen. So the intro just covered a lot of what I was going to say. I have a whole bunch of degrees that have led me to be here. I think the most important part for you to know is that after 10 years of practice where I was treating patients with Parkinson's in my clinical practice, the government gave me a 5-year grant, and they wanted to train alternative medicine researchers or alternative medicine clinicians to be better researchers. So when they were asking conventionally trained physicians to study herbs or diet, it's not the same as the red pill and the blue pill, right? I can't give you fake broccoli and you real broccoli and you fake cheeseburgers and you real cheeseburgers. There are some studies that do not lend themselves well to a double-blind placebo-controlled trial. So your tax dollars hired me to figure out better ways to do research when a double-blind placebo-controlled trial is not an option. That's what got us here today. So the first thing I did when I got this grant to find ways to improve Parkinson's outcomes was I realized that the Holy Grail, what you all wanted, was a way to slow Parkinson's progression. 200 years into this disease, there was not a tool that allowed us to measure the rate of progression. Nobody, you've all had that UPDRS finger tapping test. That is not clinically relevant. A 5-point change from 5 to 10 is not the same as a 30 to a 35. Nobody's doctor says, hey, good job, Joe, you got your UPDRS score down 3 points. The reason your doctor isn't doing that is because that score doesn't really reflect your life experience and it's not terribly clinically relevant. For research studies, it can be helpful, but for the patient, it's not. So I built a scale that would allow all of you to be able to track how fast is your disease progressing? Is it progressing? Is it getting better? Is it staying stable? As far as I know, this is the only validated measure of Parkinson's severity and progression, especially in the first 10 years, because that UPDRS score we were talking about doesn't become valid until you have a certain amount of symptoms to make it, you have to be a certain amount hunched over or a certain amount drooling for that scale to start being effective. So for young, newly diagnosed people, for people in the first 10 years, we don't really have a way to track how you're doing. So we built the ProPD. This is an app, it is free. It's gonna be kind of the linchpin of a lot of what we're talking about here today. I just wanna show you what it is. So to get this score, there are 33 symptoms of Parkinson's. And we ask you very quickly, in the last week, how bad has your constipation been? How bad has your slowness been? What about your sleep? The more severe the problem, the more you toggle to the right. If you don't have it, you toggle to the left. Short, sweet, simple. It takes about 3 to 5 minutes, and we add up all your points, and you see that little curved line that goes up. By the time a person is diagnosed, they have a score of about 500, 550, and most people get worse at about 50 points per year. So what the data says is most people get about 10 good years. Okay, well, that's what we're going to talk about. So the app is free on both iOS and Android. If there's one thing that you all do as a result of today's talk is go home and download this app, you need a tool for taking control. You cannot increase or decrease the speed without having a speedometer. So let's first just get our bearings and figure out how do your symptoms rate and how do they compare to other people diagnosed the same time as you. This is what it looks like, and the thing that I will say is we might all disagree about what the symptoms should be or the words that I used to rate them, but can we all agree that if you go through a list of 33 symptoms of Parkinson's and slide that little tab all the way to the left, I am not slow, I am not constipated, I get a great night's sleep, I have lots of motivation. If you slide all of those tabs to the left, your score is 0. I believe we would all be happy with the 0. We all agree the lower the better, even if we disagree about some of the details. Your neurologists, yourself, your loved ones would all be happy. The closer to 0 you get, the better this works. So the first thing I want to point out is that this is a highly fluctuating condition. It's not just fluctuating over days, it fluctuates over weeks, over months, and over years. The lines up above are the true fluctuations that people have. Down below are the kind of the straightened out point. So every one of these lines on here is a real person with Parkinson's. And you can see you guys are all over the board. Some people are in really bad shape when they're diagnosed and get worse fast. Some people are pretty even. But if you look closely, you will see in there that there are people who are getting better. They're not common. Our data says about 7% of people around the world are reporting fewer symptoms today than what they had last year. Those are the people I'm trying to find and I'm trying to study. So the concept is called positive deviance. I did not invent this. Some researchers from Tufts in the 70s, I think it was in Brazil, that there were children who were not growing properly. Everybody in the village had a growth disorder, and so the nutritionists from Tufts University went to figure out what was going on. And when they got to the village, they realized all these kids had really deprived stature. They were all really short, not growing well, except for a few people who were tall and normal. And long story short, they studied what are those people who are doing well and what are they doing differently. And it turns out that their parents were, the short kids, the parents were taking the watery part of the soup and saving the good chunky stuff at the bottom for themselves. And the kids that were growing properly, the parents were actually scooping up the good chunky stuff from the bottom of the soup and not being stingy with the meat and potatoes. So the concept is, can we find the people doing unusually well and figure out what they are doing differently? So again, this is what the average rate of progression looks like. The lower your score, the higher your quality of life. As your score goes up, your quality of life starts to stink more and more. And you can see that there are people who are 20 years out who are still saying my quality of life is really excellent and I hardly have any symptoms. You can also see that there are some people who are in really rough shape a couple years after diagnosis. So that is the whole point of what we're talking about, is what is the difference between those two groups? This is the study that we are running. On the handout I gave you the link to this study. If you want to make sure that people just like you are represented in this research, please consider participating in the research. This website is on your handout. It takes about an hour and a half twice a year. We send you a survey and you sit in front of the computer and answer a whole bunch of questions about what you had for breakfast and how much exercise you have and do you have a lover and all these questions. And then we tell you who are the success stories among you. So getting into the diet part. For 20 years or so, we have been studying diet in Parkinson's, and the most common, well-studied diet is the Mediterranean diet. About 10 years ago, the MIND diet started to become very popular, and that's kind of a spin-off of the Mediterranean diet, but it's a little bit different. But both of those diets have been associated with better outcomes in Parkinson's. The more you follow a Mediterranean diet, the better you do. The more you follow a MIND diet, the better you do. So that is exciting, except the problem that we run into is the box on the left represents the Mediterranean diet. The box on the right is the MIND diet. But only those green circles in the center, those are the only parts of the diet that are actually responsible for slowing Parkinson's progression. So there are components on those diets that are really good, but there are parts of those diets that don't really apply to you. And so instead of trying to squeeze a diet built for somebody else into your condition, what I wanted to do is find out, can we find a better way to, can we build a diet designed for you? So just for the MIND diet as an example, because we've already published this, what we see is the more any person adheres to this diet, the less constipation, apathy, depression, anxiety, insomnia, muscle pain, cognitive, sexual, and urinary dysfunction they have. Would anybody like help with any one of those symptoms? Right. So this is adhering to a diet. We see improvement in these things. And I'll point out, I'm not anti-med. I prescribe a lot of levodopa and pharmaceutical drugs. Think of those as playing defense. This is offense, right? Like, you have to take your meds, but these symptoms I just talked about are things that levodopa does not do a really good job treating. This is what we're talking about here, is building up a really strong defensive part of your team and a really strong offensive part of your team. That's the only way we're going to win this. So again, this is a nuanced detail. I know you can't read this slide, but I just wanted to show of all of the ingredients on the MIND diet, of all of the ingredients on the Mediterranean diet, it is only those variables in red that actually really matter in Parkinson's. So what we did is try to build a diet for Parkinson's. And I'll tell you, I've made a lot of different versions of this diet over the last 10 years as the data was rolling in. And I've gone through phases where I tried to give you a certain amount of points for eating broccoli and subtract a couple points every time you have French fries and things like that. And one, it was a little complicated, and two, I think it wasn't as accurate as the current one. So we just published a paper about a month ago that says, a person with Parkinson's, you can tell me what you've been eating for the last 30 days, and I can tell you how fast your disease is going to progress for the next 10 years. Really? So what we don't know is it too late? Can you change your diet and change that slope? How much has the damage been done? What is the delay time? And most importantly, what are you willing to do? So every one of you should have this handout. We're going to go through this kind of quick, but it's a really important part of this. I'm going to read through the list of foods that matter. There are we've been asking people about 600 different questions on this survey. We have asked about food and mushrooms and cucumbers and everything we can think of. These are the 21 variables that most predict Parkinson's progression. So I'm going to read through them, and what I wanted you to do is count on your fingers. I want every one of you to have your own score, because the next couple slides are going to impact you a lot more when you realize how bad you score. Okay, so give yourself a point if you go to the grocery store and go out of your way to buy organically grown food when possible. Give yourself a point if you cook most of your own food. Give yourself a point if you use spices liberally. If you're buying cinnamon and cumin and cloves when you go to the grocery store. Give yourself a point if every day for the last 30 days you have been averaging a half cup of nuts and seeds per day, or 4 tablespoons of nut butter each day. Give yourself a point if you have 2 tablespoons of olive oil per day. Give yourself a point for 1 cup of fresh fruit per day. Give yourself a point for a half cup of fresh vegetables 5 times a week. Give yourself a point if you have had seafood twice a week for the last month. Give yourself a point if you drink 2 glasses of wine a week or more. And 2 cups of coffee a day gets you another point. All right, look at your fingers. Those are your good points. Remember that number. Now, down at the bottom, you get a point for abstinence. If you have not had a single bite of dairy products in the last 30 days, no cheese, yogurt, butter, ice cream, sour cream, cottage cheese, yogurt, if you've had none of that, give yourself a point. Give yourself a point if you have avoided all artificial sweeteners for the last month. That's diet stuff. Chewing gum usually has aspartame in it. Those are probably the 2 big places people get it. Pork, give yourself a point if you've not touched pork, bacon, ham in the last month. Give yourself a point if you've had no beef. Give yourself a point if you've had no chicken. Give yourself a point if in the last 30 days you have not had anything fried, no tempura, no French fries, no potato chips, no corn chips. Give yourself a point if you have not had any juice to drink in the last 30 days. Give yourself a point if you avoid sugar. Give yourself a point if you have not had any soda in the last 30 days. Give yourself a point if you have had no bread, pasta, croutons, crusts, and refined grains. And give yourself a point if you have not eaten anything from a can in the last 30 days. tomato sauce, canned tomatoes, canned soups are usually the ones that slip in. All right, so add up your good points and your bad points. Anybody here scoring 15 points or more? Yeah. One. And one person who is a provider, not a patient. Okay, so less than 5% of people are getting 15 points or more. Most of you are getting 7 to 9 points. That's average. If you're getting less than 7 points, your diet is worse than the average Parkinson's person. If you're getting more than 9 points, your diet is better than the average Parkinson's person. You can see there's something called the Mediterranean and Mind diet are those purple and pink lines behind, and you can see that they have what's called a ceiling effect. They're good, but you kind of hit a wall and you can't tell how good can you get, can we get better? This allows us to get into the excellent zone a little bit more. So what this slide shows is every single point matters. For those of you who have a 4, getting your score to a 5 is associated with fewer symptoms. People who have a 6 are less symptomatic than people who have a 5. This is like paying off debt. If anyone follows Dave Ramsey, this is the snowball effect. Find the easiest place to get another couple points. An apple and peanut butter. Every day, there's 2 more points. Cucumbers and hummus. Drizzle a little extra olive oil on it. Few more points. You get the tahini, the olive oil, the vegetables. There are easy ways, I mean, everything except wine and seafood is pretty much in my morning smoothie. So there are lots of ways to get, but I have smoked salmon with my smoothie, so I get my seafood too. But there are a lot of ways to kind of stack the deck in your favor and get more points here. So, but what I want to show you here on this slide is that every point matters, and what the data says is it is both motor and non-motor symptoms that benefit. For those of you who don't understand statistics, you can see that for the people who, that gray line, that tail gets nice and wide at the end, and that is statistically means a lack of confidence. Because only 4.7% of you are actually getting more than 15 points, we don't actually know how good this can get. It could curve up and kind of normalize and get bad like everybody else, or it could keep going to almost no points, no score. And so my new job is to see how many of you I can get into that 15 points or more, and to answer the question, how asymptomatic can we actually make people with diet alone? But for us to answer that scientific question, we need to get you to 15 points or more. This slide just shows that both on the left side you see motor symptoms, on the right side you see non-motor symptoms. They both get better as dietary adherence increases. What we're looking at here is pretty amazing. What this shows is that people who are getting 15 points or more on this diet are progressing 43% slower than people getting less than 9 points. 43%. Statistically, say a person with 9 points gets 10 good years with Parkinson's. That means a person with 10 to 14 points gets about 14 good years, and a person who's getting 15 points or more is getting about 18 good years. That is a huge payoff for eating broccoli and cucumbers and apples and peanut butter. We have drawn this blue line through the center of the page, and that represents the point where your quality of life goes from good to fair. Once people's pro-PD score starts to get above 1,000, people say, this stinks. My quality of life has taken a turn for the worse. That's where people start asking about DBS. They start asking about other options. Once you get around 1,000, your quality of life really has started to go down. So what this graph shows is the more adherent you are to the diet, the longer you get to spend in those good quality of life years. Cause and effect. It's very simple here. So this is where I get the most kicking and screaming and tomatoes thrown at me is when I talk dairy. So let's address the elephant or the cow on the table. Okay, so everybody wants a loophole. I'm going to talk to you about the science in dairy. And you are all going to come at me afterwards, but my dairy's organic, but I only drink from A2 cows, but mine's not pasteurized, and I have my own goats in my backyard, and I have them named, and I love them. You all have some reason why your dairy consumption is different than the other people's, right? And I'm here to tell you that's kind of like saying, I roll my own American Spirit cigarettes, and therefore it's not as bad as normal smoking. And it actually might not be, right? Like if you have your own pet goat and you're milking it, I bet you it probably is not quite as bad, but it's still dairy. And what the data says is that dairy has very consistently been associated with Parkinson's. So this whole study for me started back in around 2010. By 2010, Harvard had already published this paper that said, listen, we just reviewed 30 years of data, and we now realize that by the time a person's diagnosed, they've had Parkinson's for 20 years-ish. If we are really going to make a meaningful dent in this disease, we need to get to people before they're diagnosed. So how do we find those people? Well, after they combed all the literature, they said, if we want to find the people who are going to get Parkinson's, they have had the greatest pesticide exposure, they consume dairy products, they have a diagnosis, they've had melanoma or head trauma. Those are the 4 biggest predictors of who in this room, of your children, of your loved ones who don't have Parkinson's. Those are the 4 biggest predictors Harvard could find in terms of who is going to get Parkinson's. This is called a forest plot, and it's already about 10 years old. If the dot is to the right of the line, it means dairy is protective against diagnosis. If the dots are lined up in the center, it means there is no relationship between dairy and diagnosis. And if the dot is to the right of the line, it means that study concluded the more dairy a person ate, the more likely they were to be diagnosed. Last time I counted, there were 18 studies that said every time your children, your non-diagnosed spouses, your best friend eats dairy, they are increasing their risk of diagnosis. So a whole bunch of people started coming to me and saying, well, I have Parkinson's, should I give up dairy? I say, hey, maybe the damage is done. Maybe you had a contaminated milkshake when you were in 7th grade. You know, washing your hands prevents colds and flus, but once you get a flu, you can't wash your hands and make it go away. Just because dairy is associated with causing Parkinson's doesn't mean that it does diddly squat once you're already diagnosed. So that was where I started my study. I wanted to find out, is it too late for you? Is the damage done, or do you have control over the situation? In our data, each question asked independently said every single dairy product is independently associated with worse outcomes. Yogurt, ice cream, cheese, sour cream, every dairy product we asked about is the more you eat, the worse your progression. Of the 21 variables that we just read through, they are not all equal. Up in the top right is canned food. Canned food is bad, but it is not as bad as soda and beef. And if you look all the way down at the end, the worst of the worst is dairy. What our data says is dairy is hurting you more than fruits and vegetables are helping you. Here we have a chart where there are 2 different lines for each variable. And up at the top it says, you know, people who drink wine are less symptomatic than people who don't drink wine. People who eat spices are less symptomatic than people who don't eat spices. But down in the middle, from across the room, you can see I found the positive deviance. We found the people who are doing better than everybody else. That's what I set out to do. Can we find the people doing better than everyone else? And you can see there is one group of people here who is hundreds of points less symptomatic than the rest of you. Those are the people who said, I have not had 1 bite of dairy in the last 30 days. And it's the thing I am least able to get you all to give up. It is easy to get you to stop eating artificial sweeteners. It is easy to get you to start cooking at home. It is easy to get you to eat more vegetables. I am realizing I am working with a bunch of dairy, bread, pasta, and chicken addicts, right? Like, and I don't know, is it a Parkinson's thing? Is it a cultural thing? But I'm here to tell you, I think these diets that you all have normalized, you eat them, your neighbor eats them, our friends eat them, we don't think twice about it because everybody's doing it, has a lot to do with the epidemic, the pandemic that is Parkinson's. We are bringing this on ourselves more than any of us care to admit. And it's both stressful to know, hey, maybe I have done something to put myself in this situation. It's even more stressful to realize I am feeding my children the foods that cause this disease. But it is tremendously empowering to know that you can change something today that will meaningfully make an impact into the future. So, I said, just think about how quickly this changes, your diet over the last 30 days. Say you went out to lunch yesterday and had a piece of pepperoni pizza. You've got the cheese, you've got the crust, is the refined grains, the canned tomato sauce, and the pepperoni. You're down 4 points. One bad decision at lunch just cost you 4 points on this 21-point scale. So where I said I was wrong in the past, I told you I tried giving points for broccoli and taking away points for French fries and things like that. And my statistician has basically said that's not actually what the data suggests. It's not that you can eat enough good food and afford to cheat a little bit based on good behavior. Does anyone know any alcoholics? What happens if an alcoholic reduces the amount that they are drinking? They're still a drinking alcoholic. They're not sober. That model works a lot better here. There is a really big difference between cutting back and stopping. Our data does not say that the people who cut back are doing that much better. Our data says the people who stop are knocking it out of the park. So we don't know that this is entirely about dairy or about diet. Maybe we're just studying ridiculously disciplined, compliant, goody two-shoes people who are doing all things right. Maybe these people who are getting 15 points are also going to the gym and seeing the best movement disorder doc in town and going to bed at 8:30 and have the best, so it could be diet, or it could be something about people who eat this type of diet. So it could be that we're studying food, but it could be that we're studying discipline and commitment and people who kind of keep having, are able to kind of aim for a target far out and follow it through. The whole intellectual part of this, we can see the more education and money people have, the better their diets. So how much of this is because people either don't know, they've never been taught, or they can't afford these foods? It's complicated. It's complicated way beyond just go home and change your diet. But I do want to I've kind of said this already, but the most critical part of this talk, I'm here to help the people with Parkinson's, but for those of you who don't have Parkinson's, and for those of you who are going to go home and cook a meal for your loved ones, you are in a position to shape their future. What this chart shows is that solid black line is true, real data. Those are real people with Parkinson's and how fast they typically progress. The line right below that is if that same person on the day of diagnosis were to change their diet, get 15 points or more, and start exercising 5 days a week, we are talking 50% reduction in slope, easily. Instead of 25 years from now having your quality of life be poor, with that 50% reduction, it's now fair. It's better, but in my mind, not good enough, right? If you take your children, your loved one who doesn't have a diagnosis, and they exercise 5 days a week and eat this diet, what we're talking about is instead of them being diagnosed in 20 years, they will be diagnosed in about 40 to 45 years. What you feed your children, you could be gifting them 2 decades of life without this disease. so that 45 years out, their quality of life is still good. That's impressive. This is where we're talking prevention is actually on the table. So this is kind of the summary of what our research looks like. Parkinson's is this little boat that has gone off course. Where you all want to be is that little fantasy island down in the bottom right? Excellent quality of life decades from now. And what I want you to do is kind of visualize every bite of broccoli you eat, you steer your boat towards the island. Every bite you eat on the bad list, you steer further away. It's not all diet. We can also see the more exercise a person gets, the fewer symptoms they have. People who exercise 30 minutes a day, 6 to 7 days a week, are about 45% less symptomatic than people who don't exercise. Anyone want 45% reduction in symptoms? Friends, another 45% reduction in symptoms for people who say true to this statement, I have a lot of friends. Of all of the variables we are studying, the two biggest predictors of how fast your disease will progress, being poor and being lonely. That's why I'm so happy you're all here. It's not that hard to exercise with friends. There's boxing classes, there's dance classes, you have tons of options here. Please use them. And I'm a big fan of feeding two birds with the same seed. If you can get your exercise and your friends in one swoop, it's smart, clever. So set goals. I don't think anyone's going to make big changes overnight. I really think it kind of comes down to the question, how bad do you want it? I mean, what our data says is you get out what you put in. I want you all to have compassion for yourselves. This is not easy. There is nothing I'm talking about here that's easy. I identified as dairy-free for about 20 years before I realized that caramel pump that they were putting in my morning coffee at the coffee shop was dairy. It's not white, it's not refrigerated. I had no clue. And every day in clinic, I have somebody who says, oh no, I don't eat dairy. You just told me you had a croissant for breakfast. They're like, yeah, but I didn't put butter on it. But do you know how they make a croissant? There's a lot of butter in there. And so I think even if you think you're doing well, when you really start paying attention, you realize, oh my gosh, this is way harder than I thought. So this is where we're at. This is the MVP study. On the handout that you have, I gave you the link to the MVP study. And there is more here to unpack than I think we have the capacity to really get into the details with, but I think a lot of you want to know, well, what am I supposed to have for breakfast? And where am I going to get my protein? And if you take away my dairy, where am I going to get my calcium? And there are literally thousands of those questions. I don't know how many of you have started using artificial intelligence, but I'm going to give you a little tutorial here. If you go to ChatGPT, it's free. You give them your email address. This becomes part of a global database. I would not upload any bank information or ask where to bury the body or anything like that, right? This is just for you to get additional information. But if you go to ChatGPT, I built GPT, you can see it on the left-hand column, called the Pro Diet Coach. And you can download it onto your phone, and it is like having me and my opinions in your back pocket. All of my data has been uploaded into this. You can go to the grocery store and take a picture of something at the grocery store and say, does this qualify? What recipes could I make with this? I took a picture of my refrigerator. It told me what to throw out and what recipes I could make with what was left. You can say, hey, I just got a 5 out of 21 points. I'm overwhelmed. I'm going to freak out. Just help me. Give me something. Give me a cheap, simple, easy 3-day meal plan on a budget less than $20 a day. And it will spit it out for you. You can say, oh, I don't like spicy food. It'll fix it. So this is free. It's on Android, iOS. The app is Android and iOS, and this is on the internet. All of these resources are free to you. This is what the Pro Diet Coach looks like. I don't know if you can read this, but it's not just information and data. I have it set up so that for those of you who are getting less than 5 points, it says, hey, come on, we can do this. We're in this together. There are a lot of people who are struggling right now. And for those of you who are getting 14 points, it's like, oh, you got this. Let's just make a couple little changes. So it's designed to kind of meet you where you are at and help escort you. And then I have, for the last 5 years, been teaching an online program called Parkinson School. This is my baby. This is where I dump everything that I know. Everything I tell patients in clinic, I also tell people on school. It's all recorded. Instead of waiting for a visit, you can go on anytime, watch classes. I've given everybody a free pass to the class. I don't care if you binge watch the whole thing and cancel, but for those of you who are inspired, intrigued, curious, you want to learn about Makuna, you want to learn about supplements, you want to learn about exercise, you want to learn, all of that is recorded on here, and I've given you all a free pass to the program. Just to kind of wrap up, this isn't tremendously different than what you've heard about in the past, right? When we talk about the Mediterranean diet and the Mind diet and where does this fit in, just to be clear, we are all in agreement that the more vegetables, nuts and seeds, fruit, olive oil, seafood, and wine you drink, the fewer symptoms you will have.
Good question. Fruits and vegetables are good. Why is juice bad?
Well, if your juice starts with a pile of oranges, you can count that as fresh fruit. I don't really know the answer to that question. I think there are a lot of people, it could be the plastic containers. It could be that a lot of what the juice that people are drinking is 3% juice, not real juice. So I think it could just be, people who drink juice are also more likely to be eating cheeseburgers. I mean, it's a short, it's simple sugars, right? So we all agree that red meat and fried food is bad. So even if you don't like me and you don't like this diet, all the Parkinson's diet research in history agrees on the things that are in the middle. Let's all agree right now to stop the fried food, the red meat, and eat more of those other things. Where our diet is really different is our diet also says no pork, no chicken. Turkey has always been fine. Every step of the way in our research, turkey has never been associated with worse progression. Chicken consistently has been. I was thinking that it wasn't really about the bird, that it was more about what we do with chicken. No one makes turkey nuggets. No one's having fried turkey sandwiches, right? And so maybe it's not the chicken is bad, it's how we are preparing the chicken that could be bad. And then I had a patient of mine who's a farmer who told me, oh no, these are very different birds with very different farming practices and very different feeding situations. And so I don't know what's up with that, but for those of you who are really having a hard time giving up chicken, maybe you could replace it with turkey. But this is kind of just showing that, we're all kind of saying something similar. The difference is our diet really is much more strict about dairy. And again, none of this is my opinion. I like dairy as much as all the rest of you. I am not vegan. I'm from northern Michigan. I could live off cheese. I understand the kicking and the screaming. But the data is the data. I just asked 3,000 people, who are you and what are you doing and how are you eating? And dairy came to the top as the food that is hurting you the most. What you do with that information is kind of, so here's the cheat sheet. Here's a cheat sheet. This is down in the bottom corner of the handout for those of you who just want to cut something out and put it on your refrigerator. This is really as simple as it is. I have purposely tipped the scale towards the bad stuff because that is what's happening. The progression that we're seeing, I think, really does have something to do with the current diets that we are eating. And what I want you all to do is tip that scale the other direction. The last thing I will say is everything I've been talking about so far is about progression. And obviously you all want that, but it's also something distant. And it's harder to feel motivated about tomorrow when you want to feel better today. The other thing that I find absolutely amazing is my statistician, the bottom line shows the average rate of Parkinson's progression. You can see the fluctuations and that little upward trending slope. Well, my statistician zoomed in on the people who were adhering to this diet and the people who were not adhering to the diet. Look at the green line in the middle. That is the Parkinson's lived experience of symptom fluctuations in a person who is adhering to this diet. It's bad, still fluctuates. If you were a boat sailing those waters, it's still choppy, but nothing compared to that line up top. That line up top is the lived experience for people not adhering to this diet. When I talk to my friends who also treat people with Parkinson's, it's like we're talking two different languages. I mean, when I talk about what Parkinson's is and what people can expect and what symptoms they have, it's nothing compared to what they're experiencing. My patients are doing so much better because I nag about diet, because I make them do blood work, because I make them exercise and go to bed early. Maybe I'm just a big placebo. I'm not really sure what's happening, but I'm telling you, that middle green line is attainable for all of you. Thank you. Good question. So the question was, what about highly processed fake meats? You know, there are highly processed fake foods. I'm giving a talk on the 28th of every month for Parkinson's School. I give a talk, and on the 28th of September, I'm talking about the role of ultra-processed foods in Parkinson's, and that's most of those foods. So they're crap and junk food for most reasons, but here's the deal. They're a good stepping stone. It's just a teaching tool. While you are learning to find other foods and other meals, I think they are a great alternative. I don't use them a ton, but you know, I'm Polish, and I've made like, what are the pork beef cabbage rolls? Yeah, stuffed cabbage rolls with fake meat. Like, I didn't tell anybody at the party they were fake meat, and everyone went back for seconds and loved them. Right? So I think it can be a good way to just get a sense of feeling normal and that you're not depriving yourself. But long term, we can find healthier whole foods, but go for it as a teaching tool. Yeah. 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 All the plant-based milks are fine. Go feed yourself all the almond, soy, rice, hemp, macadamia nut milk you want. And someone just taught me to make my own cashew milk. It was embarrassing how much money I spent on milk I mean, you take a handful of cashews, put it in a blender with some water, add a little vanilla and salt, and you have milk for a week. I mean, it is ridiculously easy to make my own milk. And frankly, it tasted better than what I buy. So, you know, I don't need you all to turn into homesteaders, but it was embarrassing how easy it was and how short a time it took and how cheap. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just talking to people when you're on carb overload, but they say you're not supposed to have any nuts 2 hours before or 2 hours after you take the medicine. And I take medicine twice a day. I mean, they're not taking any nuts at all.
The 2 hours is extreme and not true. So first of all, it is whatever you can get away with. So if you do not have any problem with protein and meds, don't worry about it. There are probably a lot of people paranoid about protein who don't need to be, and there are a lot of people whose meds aren't working very well, and all they need to do is change when they eat their protein. So the rule is, here, the way it works is the same receptors in your intestine that absorb dietary protein are the same receptors that absorb your levodopa. Whoever gets there first gets in. So the best way to do this is our dietitian has put together a 4-day low protein diet. No one will become protein malnourished in 4 days. And what she does is she has everyone go on a 4-day diet. I'll tell you about 80% of people, especially our golfers, by day 3 are sending flowers and like, oh my gosh, I can't get over how much better I feel. So once people realize, wow, this is how meds are supposed to work, right? So you get all the protein out of the system and you just get a sense of, oh, this is what meds feel like without any interference. Once you kind of realize that, then we have you start having your protein at dinner. So a low protein breakfast, a low protein lunch, and then save your protein for dinner. It would be great if you could take your last pill a little bit before that, but whatever, whoever gets there first. And then once that's dialed in, then we start playing what can you get away with? Oh, look, peanut butter has protein, but no one really ever complains if they have an apple and peanut butter throughout the day. That doesn't seem to interfere. Hummus has a lot of protein. No one really complains about cucumbers and hummus interfering. So the general rule is less than 10 grams at a time of protein is usually pretty easy to slip in without interfering with meds. If plant-based proteins are usually easier to digest, peanut butter is a lot easier to digest than steak, right? And so the meat can sit around in your stomach 6 to 8 hours. Nut butters tend to be through pretty quickly. So I would not worry about the timing so much, and you certainly don't need to give it 2 hours. Most people, I say, once you've taken your levodopa, give it about 30 minutes. There's a little trick, you know those vitamin C packets, those powdered vitamin C packets? If you take your levodopa with either a packet of powdered vitamin C or 1 lemon's worth of lemon juice and water, it will accelerate how quickly your levodopa kicks in and breaks down. About 60% of people with Parkinson's don't even have enough stomach acid to fully digest their pill. So if you take your levodopa with a little acid, like we find in lemons or ascorbic acid, it will kick it in a little bit faster and people will get 25% more levodopa out of each pill. So people will usually do that trick sometimes if they want to, their friends say, hey, let's go out to eat. Yeah, sure.
Now, you say pork is red meat fat, but isn't bacon full of fat?
Yep.
And other pork that we buy roast, I can buy pork that there's no fat at all. Does that make a difference?
No, what makes you think it's the fat? That's the bad part.
Because it's bad for your heart.
But we're not talking about your heart. I'm just the messenger. No, I don't know that the fat is the issue. I wish I knew what it was, and then I'd be all over the loopholes with you, because I also like bacon.
And I saw on the chart was refined grains.
Yeah.
How about whole grains or ancient grains?
So whole grains eat up. You can have all the rice and quinoa and barley and rye and whatever ingredients you make, no problem at all. This book I'm reading right now is called Ultra Processed People. And it's basically saying, you know, when you have wheat berries, right, that is whole grain. When you grind that down and separate this and that and glue it back together to be shaped like bread or pasta or whatever it is, it's kind of like you're building your house out of particle board. Right? And it's not the same. Like, I get that it started as the same food, but it has been taken apart and reprocessed and put back together and packaged so that you'll think it's healthy and appealing. And so once it's refined, it loses its potency. And it could have something to do with the microbiome. There's a really neat study I read a few years ago that said something like quinoa, spelt, and farro were 3 of the best things you could feed the good, healthy gut bugs. The second you turn those to flour, it no longer feeds the good bugs.
Have you introduced in any of your studies the fact of restricted time eating or intermittent fasting?
Great question. I don't know if we certainly haven't analyzed that data. I'm pretty sure we're asking about it, but we haven't. Oh, sorry. The question was, what about intermittent fasting or some sort of calorie restriction eating? So what I generally tell people is the evidence is actually pretty solid that there is some real value to not grazing all of the time, that after an 8-hour fast, you start genetically turning on genes that are associated with anti-aging and longer, healthier living. And so what I tell most of my patients is if you can stop eating 3 hours before bed and do a 12-hour fast every night, that would be a dream. Like say you go to bed at 10, you finish your dinner by 7, and then 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. you don't eat. That's probably the easiest way for people to get the benefits of intermittent fasting without feeling restricted and they can't have a life. Good. Yeah. Yeah, what about turkey bacon and ground turkey? I just made turkey bacon and Brussels sprouts the other night. They were delicious. Go for it. Turkey's allowed. I'm not trying to turn you all vegan, I promise. Everyone else has it all figured out? Has anybody already changed their diet and noticed benefits? Wow.
What about alcohol? You said wine's okay.
Yep.
What about
Gin and tonics?
bourbon?
I'm a gin girl. Yeah, no. So 2 things. In our study, in the 21 food variables, only wine made the cut. However, people with Parkinson's aren't big drinkers in the first place. So what I'm about to say, take with a grain of salt. But what our data very clearly says is the more anybody drinks, the fewer symptoms they have. It could be because they're too drunk to recognize their symptoms. But really, even the people who are quote unquote big drinkers are maybe having 2 or 3 drinks a night, not even every night. Like we don't have a lot of big drinkers with Parkinson's. In fact, when we study this epidemiologically, there is a disproportionate number of teetotalers that go on to get Parkinson's. You've probably all heard, the more cigarettes you smoke and coffee you drink, the less likely you are to ever be diagnosed with Parkinson's. We have known that for decades. I didn't realize that there was also that data that said that about alcohol. I mean, even there's a study that says when they do liver surgery on alcoholics, they can see less Parkinson's proteins in the liver of alcoholics with liver disease. So I don't know, and again, I really truly do not think that tobacco, coffee, and booze are necessarily protective. They might be, but what is also possible is what we call reverse causation. When I had my first cup of coffee, the dopamine flowed, right? I experienced blissful pleasure and I went for a second cup. When a person with Parkinson's had their first cup of coffee when they were 19 years old, they took it, it's bitter, makes me jittery, and I don't get that much pleasure. No thanks, keep your coffee. Same thing with the alcohol. We see the first person who ever wrote a paper about the Parkinson's personality was 1968. The head of neurology and psychiatry at University of Michigan said Parkinson's could be considered a badge of honor. These are society's best. The people who get Parkinson's are the overachievers, the presidents of the PTA. They are the most loyal. They are the people who stay late to get the job done. They are the ones who dot their I's and cross their T's, right? You all were goody two-shoes back in the day. People who go on to get Parkinson's in high school got fewer speeding tickets and skipped less class. I skipped class and I was like, that was fun, let's do it again. You guys skipped class and you're like, now I'm late for my homework and that wasn't fun, right? Like you didn't get that same dopamine rush. So we don't know what's cause and effect, but we do know that there were some parts of your personality. Parkinson's has probably been around inside of you way longer than most of you realize. And many of the things that you call part of your personality may actually be part of this condition. So this isn't like free reign to go drink a bunch of booze. I can give you 100 reasons why alcohol is really, really not good for you. I mean, really, it's a very, very dangerous drug, and it's horrible for all kinds of body parts and families and public health, etc. But the data is the data, and no question about it, people who have 2 glasses of wine a week are doing better than people who do not. You do not get the point for Jack and Coke. Great question. I said if I had $5 for everybody, every time I was asked what's better, red wine or white wine, my entire study would be funded. The answer, we couldn't write it on the thing. The data wasn't quite strong enough to make it part of the map here, but red is the answer. When you look under the hood, no doubt about it, red is better than white. The question is $2 chuck the same, as good as the fancy wine? We don't know. We haven't gotten into that level of nuance yet, but I actually expect yes. I think there are a lot of pesticides in wine. I would be a little thoughtful about that. And to be honest, I actually think one of the things that we've really been overlooking is not even the consumption of it, the drinking of it, but what tobacco and coffee and red wine all have in common is a lot of olfactory antioxidants. Just smelling them, that is a whole, without taking a sip, you just smelling a glass of coffee or red wine, you just got a whole bunch of antioxidants straight to your brain. Your nose is the only place where your brain is directly exposed to the outside world. So even if you're not big drinkers, I would say they're like, smell it, sip, take little teeny sips, but smelling it might have some value too, even if it's $2 chuck.
So what about the genetic predisposition of 20%?
Yeah, so the question is, what about the genetic predisposition? So I think the data is about 15% of people have a Parkinson's gene. That even those 15%, we wouldn't call it genetically predisposed. We're just saying of all the people out there, 15% of people have a gene associated with Parkinson's. So the distinction here is there are a lot of people with Parkinson's genes who never go on to develop Parkinson's. So just having the gene does not mean that your disease is caused by Parkinson's. It may have been a straw on the camel's back. It may have been a predisposition, but even the people with the genetic predisposition, I would argue, are deciding how this unfolds. And so if there, even just say 15% of you do have a gene that is contributing to Parkinson's, that means 85% of you are here because there's something in your environment that has caused you to be here. Pesticides, Ray Dorsey is going to be speaking to this group in a couple weeks. He can kind of take over where I've left off. He's going to talk to you about the environmental contributors from pesticides to golf courses and things like that. So between the two of us, I've got the diet nutrition part. He can talk a little bit more about the environmental exposures, but we are really talking about at least 85% of you are here because there's something in your environment that has led you to be here. There is, I believe if you have a parent with Parkinson's, yes, there is a little teeny bit of heredity, but if you do not have one of those genes, I probably wouldn't worry about it. For anyone who wants to find out if you have a gene, it's usually a couple thousands of dollars to get tested. There is a study happening right now. It's called PD Generation, put on by the Parkinson's Foundation, and they are doing the Parkinson's genetic panels for free, and you will get your own results. It is not only useful to you, it is useful to society and to your children. So this is a pretty neat opportunity for people who do want to look under the hood a little bit and find out if they have a gene. You can just Google Parkinson's Foundation Generation Study, and they will get you all set up. That's a great question. The question was, do we study the way that mindfulness or meditation or some sort of contemplative practice might be involved? No, not really, only because I don't know how I would measure that. I mean, I think the real honest answer is most of us think we're more contemplative than we actually are. Meditation means a million things to different people. Does a person who meditates 5 minutes get less credit than a person who meditates for 30 minutes? So we do ask if you've taken like the MBSR mindfulness-based stress reduction class. We ask, do you meditate? But we haven't analyzed those data, and I'm not terribly convinced they're going to be really useful, only because we haven't defined what mindfulness is.